And just like that, guys, the Euros is over. And I'm sad. I really, really love it when there's just football every day and then every other day. Honestly, towards the end of the tournament, when we had to wait 3, 4 days, I was losing my mind. You get used to having, we had 3, 4 games on some days. Absolutely incredible. Obviously, I cannot wait for the new season to begin. But seeing as the Euros just finished, I thought let's do a kind of special awards video discussing my personal opinion, my personal thoughts. If you disagree, that's totally fine. But also, I'm going to be including, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? So there are going to be winners to each of these categories, but then I'm going to give honorable mentions, I guess, because some of them are so obvious and you could argue maybe a little bit boring. We'll just kick off straight away with the best player of the tournament, of course. I think 95% of the people watching the tournament would say Rodri. And I don't really need to say why, do I? Is he going to win the Ballon d'Or? It's going to be an interesting one, that's for sure. I think a lot of people were saying that Jude Bellingham would have been right up there if he won the Euros. And I just think, really? The Ballon d'Or is the best player of that season, that year, and I don't think he has been as good as Rodri. And I think there are actually other Madrid players that are probably further. I don't know. It's a really tricky one, that, but Rodri for sure is going to be up there, and he was the best player in the tournament consistently. Honorable mentions though. Maybe it's a bit boring again because Spain won the tournament and I'm mentioning another Spanish player, but Fabian Ruiz, he could also be included in the surprise player for me. I knew he was a good player, but we haven't seen too much of him. When he's played at PSG, in and out of the team, we haven't really seen the absolute top quality of Fabian Ruiz, but he has been just as impressive as Rodri in a lot of games. So I wanted to give him an honourable mention. Also, Gakpo. I thought Gakpo was very good for the Netherlands. He deserves a shout. Who else? See, I don't think many of the French players performed that well. I know Germany went out the round before that, but then Musiala was very impressive and Wirtz was very impressive. So there's a couple of honourable mentions for the best players, but obviously it has to go to Rodri. Up next, again, very obvious, the best young player. It has to be Yamal, who, of course, started the tournament as a 16-year-old, finished it as a 17-year-old. And, I mentioned it in my review of the game last night, the final, that, this kid, he's already got 4 assists. He's just 3 behind the record, which is Ronaldo. Over 6 tournaments, it's taken him to get his 7 assists, and we're almost there with Yamal already, which is unbelievable. But if we're talking purely best young, exciting talent from the tournament, it has to be Yamal, closely followed by Williams on the other wing. Both players were fantastic in this tournament. Some other mentions as well. I think Cole Palmer. I hate calling him Cole Palmer, but if you know, you know. If he got more minutes, would be up there, but of course didn't get much game time, so I don't think that quite works out. Nothing else really screams at me right now. Honestly, it hasn't been the best tournament for young players, in my opinion. We've actually seen a lot of the top performances come from players that are already very much in their peak. We've had a lot of good performances from consistently great players over the last few years. I want to give a mention to a few of the Swiss players, but are they young enough? I thought Vargas was good, but I don't think he's that young anymore. The obvious answer is Yamal, and I think he is the next big thing, isn't he? I think we talk about Endrick. I think Yamal is the one, really. Okay, and then the last really easy one, team of the tournament. It obviously has to be Spain because they won the damn thing, but they could have finished second today. England could have won this game, and I still would have said Spain were team of the tournament because England weren't very good. And that would have been the most lucky tournament win of all time. Spain were a real team, and that's the key word here. Just a team. On and off the pitch, you can tell they're all really close. And it's funny, over the years, similar to England and some other nations where you have that divide because of club football. Think back to the Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid split that they've had. Thinking back to Sergio Ramos, Gerard Piqué, Puyol, these guys, and then there was obviously conflict between them, and it ruined tournaments for them for sure. But they've now won 4 Euros, which is incredible. And I can't remember watching a Spanish team be so tight knit. They look like a really solid group of friends. And let's be real, they didn't have the best squad in the tournament. I wouldn't even put them in the top 3, top 4 squads, genuinely. So that makes it even more impressive. So well done to Spain. Team of the tournament for sure. Now, up next, we've got surprise player. And I'm not going to say his name, so I've just put it on screen. He has got a move to Monaco, it seems. I'm not sure if it's actually deal done. We'll call him Georges. This guy was absolutely the surprise player for me. I'd heard of him playing for Metz, but I didn't realise he was that good. I guess there are a few other players that really impressed from the Georgian national team because, I mean, they qualified from the groups, which was, I think, unexpected. And they had some really good performances. Kvaratskhelia, of course, was really impressive. Mamardashvili as well. But this guy, for me, just out of nowhere, really, I was just blown away by him. Incredibly gifted on the ball, great running, very smart runs in behind. And, of course, got himself, was it 3 goals, 1 assist, I believe? So I couldn't think of many others that surpassed him. But we can think of some honourable mentions, maybe. I think Mainoo is a surprise player for me. The reason I haven't given him this award, per se, is because I knew Mainoo was good. Okay, you don't break into a Manchester United team if you're not that good. But I didn't realise just how good. So definitely an honourable mention to him. And another player, Cucurella. We all know he's got that quality, and that's why, again, I haven't put him in this, because at Brighton, we saw just how good he could be. He's a Barcelona academy player. Of course, he's got it, but at Chelsea, we haven't seen it at all. But then in the tournament, really, really good. Now, an interesting one. Flop of the tournament. I've given it to Foden purely because we made it all the way to the final. He had a lot of minutes, and he didn't score. He didn't assist. He didn't do enough, nearly enough. And it's not just him, by the way. The entire England squad didn't really show up. Well, not the entire squad. I think Mainoo deserves a shout, and Guehi, and Palmer with a great moment, Saka with his great moment. Of course, Bellingham had his great moments as well. But I think with the ability that Foden has, and we were all expecting so much more from him, if you think him and Bellingham in the middle of the pitch, rotating around, and then you've got obviously Saka on the right, and you just expect Foden to wow everyone, but he was awful in the group games. Awful. Genuinely awful. A little bit better in the knockouts. He got better and better. I thought in the semi-finals he did okay, but then in the final went missing, and he wasn't the Foden that we see week in, week out in the Premier League. I'm really not sure why he wasn't able to flourish. I think the system maybe wasn't working. And I think Southgate, unfortunately, hasn't got the best out of a lot of players. Honourable mentions, I think it's probably fair to say Mbappe and Griezmann should be up there as well as the biggest flops. I think Mbappe would admit it himself. Really poor from him. Of course, the nose injury wouldn't have helped, and having to wear a mask is not an excuse, but I mean, for sure, has an effect. And who knows if he was playing through pain? Maybe his face was hurting. I can only imagine if you do that running and putting the weight on your feet and doing this with your head is going to hurt, isn't it? But I just can't imagine him having that as an excuse. The chances he had in the tournament, he could have scored easily. But maybe the biggest flop is just France. They weren't very good, were they? They really weren't very good at all. Now, here's an interesting award. Big move incoming. I have gone with Mamardashvili. The reason I'm going with him is because it seems there is a short supply of top quality goalkeepers these days. There are so many clubs looking for a goalkeeper that can do it all, and we saw just how good he could be. I think he will easily, whether it's this transfer window or the next, maybe in January, next summer, he will get a move to a top European side. I could easily see him going to a Chelsea. I could even see him like maybe potentially going to to a Barcelona or a Bayern if Neuer retires. And he is top quality. He really is. Honourable mentions. I think Olmo is a very good shout. The only reason I haven't included him is because I think he's going to stay at RB Leipzig for another season. So I don't think that big move is incoming right now. But technically speaking, Olmo probably impressed more than most. And he obviously isn't playing at the so-called top European 10 clubs, although RB Leipzig are obviously doing very well. Who else could get big moves? Trying to think. Out of all the teams that did well in the tournament, I think those are the two that come to mind. There are obviously a few Spanish players that maybe aren't at clubs that they could be playing for, and maybe they could get a big move at some point, but I think I've covered the two that I would want to talk about the most. We'll move on to the best goal of the tournament. For me, it's the Yamal strike against France. I think Bellingham's overhead kick, which is going to be a mention later on in the next award, actually. I think Yamal's was just special. Announcing himself, really. We'd all seen how good he'd been just in general, providing assists, being an outlet for the team. Structurally, Spain looked so good because both wingers knew what they were doing. And this goal just, I think the whole world learned Lamine Yamal's name. But we'll move on to the best moment. And that's why I think the Bellingham goal isn't the best goal, because for me, it was the best moment. And this is a very personal thing. So I'd love to know your best moment of the tournament, guys. It's going to be very different for everyone, different supporters. But with England struggling so much in that match and in the tournament in general, we needed a really special moment. And, you know, I could happily put Saka's goal in there as well against Switzerland. But there was something about this Bellingham one because I just didn't expect it. I thought we were pretty much done in that game. And it was just a sheer moment of quality. And it was a I'm Jude Bellingham moment. Quality player, quality moment. And I think it goes down as my favourite moment of the tournament, even though I'm a Saka fanboy, all right? We'll move on to the biggest upset. Surely it's got to be Georgia beating Portugal and qualifying as well. That's a great thing, not an upset because Portugal got beaten, because Portugal made it through as well. But no one would have predicted this result before the tournament. Georgia were not given much hope, put it that way, and they proved a lot of people wrong. Sometimes you shouldn't underestimate other teams, even if you don't recognize a lot of their players, because when you play as a team like they did and trust each other and have a plan, a clear plan, and of course a bit of luck, anything can happen in tournament football. And it just so happens they were doing that against Portugal. I think on that day they could have beaten anyone. It was just one of those moments. And now the final award, the biggest learning point for me. And I'm sure a lot of people will agree. English officials suck. No, let's look at this from a wider perspective. We saw countless countries have referees referee games at the Euros, and it felt like genuinely every time there was an English referee, there were problems. And again, a wider perspective, VAR, I think, was much, much, much better in this tournament than what we have come to expect in the Premier League. And of course, I'm a Premier League fan, so I watched that the most, and it's terrible. It's a weekly issue. It's a weekly talking point. Whereas at the Euros, I would say there was only 3 or 4 occasions where people were questioning VAR, and that is significantly better than normal. It's still not perfect, but it was faster. It was more efficient. They were more accurate with it. They introduced a couple new things. I didn't like the sensor in the ball at first to see if there was a touch with a hand. I guess it makes sense though. If that technology is available, why not use it? The semi-automated offsides, brilliant. It's much faster. And I mean, it puts the debate to sleep, doesn't it? Because it's automated, it's machine done. It's not a human drawing the lines, right? So it does help a lot. But I think, honestly, the standard of refereeing in England needs to be looked at. And that was my biggest takeaway from this tournament, that the refereeing could be so much better in football in general, but mostly in the Premier League. The best league in the world, right? With the worst refereeing. make it make sense. But that is the end of my Euros 2024 coverage. I hope you've enjoyed the Operation England videos. Arsenal play in 10 days, I believe. We've got a pre-season game against Bournemouth. I don't think I'm watching it live because it's something stupid like 4 in the morning. So I will be doing my review after watching extended highlights. But that's when Operation Arsenal will return. I've really enjoyed the Euros. England made it all the way to the final somehow. Of course, we couldn't quite get the job done, but it was a memorable experience. I haven't heard anything about Southgate yet. I'm presuming he will walk soon. And maybe I would talk about what Southgate's done as a coach for England if I fancy doing that. But this is probably my last video covering the Euros, and what a tournament it's been. Not the best ever, but it was still really entertaining, and roll on the World Cup in 2 years.